Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Keith McCormick. Keith is an independent consultant, thought leader, and LinkedIn learning contributor. He also serves as Cloud Factory's Chief Data Science Advisor. Keith started out in the 90s as an analytics software trainer. For the last several years, Keith's emphasis has been working with analytics management to more efficiently run their teams and to nurture new hires as they expand their teams. Please join me in welcoming Keith McCormick. Hey, Keith.
Thanks. I've been very much looking forward to this. I've enjoyed the other interviews that I've heard. I had a lot of fun listening to those.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. So, Keith, as you know, Work from the Inside Out is all about all the twists, the turns, the journeys that people have been on in their careers. And I know that you've had a really interesting journey. And so take us back to some of the earlier years and how those may have informed where you are now.
I grew up in Rhode Island, and a couple of things that are kind of interesting about that, I think. I always knew that even from a young age, I always sensed that I would be college bound because I was a curious kid. And, some teachers at least would encourage me, but I wasn't really a great student. I'd be interested in whatever the teacher wasn't talking about, So I guess some young kids get distracted by, sports or social activities and things like that. And that prevents them from, attending to their studies. I was always interested in other books. So it's not that I wasn't interested in learning. I just usually want to know part of whatever was going on in the classroom. So that and a bunch of factors led to my folks trying to get me into a Catholic school when I was high school age, because in my town, the graduation rate even wasn't that great. And the percentage going to college was really quite small. In fact, years later, I met the superintendent of that school district. I had to interview him interview somebody, an education leader. I don't know what the assignment was, but I had this little interview with him. And he used to joke that most of the students would graduate and go to Bradford U. It wasn't a university, it was the soap works. They'd go to the soap factory. That's one of the big employers in town.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a bit of a turning point for me, switching at middle school to this school that was about a half hour away, and all kinds of complicated things about having to borrow the family car to drive to school and stuff like that. But that was a transition. It was almost like the beginning of a college experience for me.
Yeah, I bet.
Because it was, it was basically like a prep school. It wasn't, certainly like an elite school, but pretty much everybody that was there was going to go to, college. So, not a couple of wealthy students, I guess, but most of us were just middle-class kids. But it was just basically a way that we could go to, a high school. We'd have a better chance of, getting into school.
So you had this pivot point and driving yourself to school and kind of having this sort of heightened academic expectation and sort of heightened level of independence. And it sounds like maybe you became a little bit of a different kind of student at that point?
No, that's certainly fair to say. So there's a couple of themes that, lasted into adulthood, I think it's fair to say, that started then. Because there was all this pressure to do what you had to do to get into school. And again, this was not an elite institution, but it was a school where, 95% of us or whatever planned on going to college. So we would do things like SAT prep, even as a sophomore. And
Yeah.
that ended up being an important theme for me because I found out that I was much better at that than I was at school. So I drove my math teachers crazy because I wasn't very good about getting my homework done on time, but I would do very well on standardized tests.
Interesting, huh?
And that ended up becoming a research topic throughout my 20s, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point about,
Yeah.
what's going on with that phenomenon. So in other words, I was the classic underachiever, they call it, where my test scores were better than my grades.
Yeah.
And I always hated that phrase. I think the other phrase is just as insulting, the overachiever. I mean,
Right.
to call a teenage kid an overachiever, what does that mean exactly? It seems like
Right.
you're judging them for doing well in school,
Yeah.
But that whole overachiever, underachiever thing became a topic of fascination with me since I was a classic example of one of those two types. And teachers were constantly telling me how, I was lazy and I wasn't buckling down, but there was something more interesting going on psychologically, with all of that. But I became fascinated with this underachiever thing.
So, well, it's interesting that you say you became fascinated with it because for some kids, I could see where it would have done a real number on them psychologically to the point where they might have lowered their expectations of themselves and, maybe just not tried any harder or,
Yeah.
I know enough about you and what you've achieved over the years to know that you've excelled in many areas. So, I'm just curious what your reflection is now about how you thought about getting that kind of feedback from teachers, how you processed that and how you went forward from there.
Well, the word rebellious is probably the wrong word, but I can't think of a better one. I was very kind of rebellious about it, but not in an acting out way. I wasn't, shoplifting or something like that. The more teachers got on my back about this, your test scores are really strong, your grades are mediocre, therefore you're lazy, right? I mean, my way of acting out was to start to read, kind of laughing just even saying this, I'd read like these classic mid-century education books.
Uh-huh.
I'd read, even like going back to the 50s and 60s, but I read all this education theory stuff. And I read Howard Gardner, his book on multiple intelligence program, because it's a really famous book.
Yeah.
But you might not recall that that's when it came out. It came out 84, 85, something like that. I was like a sophomore and stuff. So this stuff was in the news at the time. You would go to the bookstore and it would be sitting prominently at the beginning of the bookstore. So that was my version of acting out, was to read a stack of education theory books to help explain why I was acting this way. Because I wasn't impressed with any of the explanations that my teachers came up with. And some of them were not just disappointed, they were angry. So my junior year religion teacher, I still remember quite well, saw me with one of these education theory books, and he didn't judge me like everybody else. He didn't say, Keith, put that away and do your homework. He said, that stuff's interesting. It's in the news, but it's really ultimately very superficial. You need to read Summerhill. Do you know the book that I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I read that in college.
Yeah, so here I was like 15 years old, and he said, this 7 intelligence stuff, the other one that was a famous book at the time that probably no one would have heard of now was called Horace's Compromise. It was written by a guy named Ted Sizer, who was the head of the education department at Brown.
Yes.
Who I met when I was a freshman, because I told my college advisor that I admired his book and I wanted to read him. So we just jumped in the car and we drove to Providence and we talked to Ted Sizer. So, so I was doing all these, I thought, cool things, but a lot of my teachers judged me for it. This teacher did not. He said, these are all great, but add this to the stack.
Wow.
I still have a copy of Summerhill downstairs, I'm sure.
Wow. So this is fascinating. So I love the way you're painting this picture of yourself in high school and the relationships you had with your teachers and the way you navigated the feedback you were getting from them.
At the time, it was certainly stressful. So briefly, where it took me was I had to decide what to do with all of this. So my
Yeah.
favorite subject was probably history, because,
Yeah.
we've been talking for a few minutes. People might forget that when you introduced me that I'm a data scientist now.
Right. Right.
I'm not an educator. I don't do any of these things that we're talking about professionally. So what was I going to do? Well, I had to figure out where to apply to schools. And my folks were kind of bemused during this whole period. I mean, I think they just didn't know what to do with me, but they felt like they were doing what they had to do, which was they got me out of my local high school and to
Yeah.
this other school, and it was middle class family, so it was an expense that they had to take on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think they felt like they were doing their thing, but there were two things about my college plans where they really kind of drew a line in the sand and they weren't too excited about. One was maybe I would go to one of these very Summerhill type colleges,
Uh-huh.
like Bard or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
these brochures, and I was fired up about that. And it was like they would just roll their eyes. It really out of horror. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't think discouragement was really the emotion that they were experiencing. They were
Yeah.
just terrified that that's what I would do.
Yeah.
So they talked me out of that. And then the other thing that they talked me out of was doing any kind of liberal arts major. That was verboten because the feeling was I wouldn't be able to get a job. And you're influenced at that age. How can kids say that they're not influenced by their folks at that age, but everybody is.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So on both of those counts, they won. So I went to an engineering school. And it's not like computer science was uninteresting to me.
Yeah.
But that's what I ended up studying. But history was out. So I did feel like college was almost like paying penance for these mistakes I made in high school. Like I had to make up for it some way. Like, yeah, I kind of, I was kind of screwed up student in high school. I mean, obviously I did well enough to get into a good school. So I wasn't, a complete disaster as a high school student, but this whole idea that I wasn't living up to my potential or whatever, I felt like I had to make up for that. So I was paying my dues.
Wow. Wow. I mean, you think about it all now, or at least the way I'm hearing it, it's, to hear the dynamic, like I'm paying my dues, I was screwed up, or I was told I was lazy, and you're reading these cutting edge, educational theory books and, scoring, highly on these, standardized tests. And you probably, you could have probably run circles around half your teachers in different kinds of ways. And they just, clearly it sounds like they just didn't know what to do with you. And so they just sort of, knocked you down or tried to. And I can understand how that must have been very stressful in many ways because no one really understood you and no one tried to understand you other than this one teacher who probably didn't quite understand you, but knew not to knock you down. And your parents were just trying to steer you in the right direction. And my sense is that you got that. You understood that your parents were really trying to do the right thing by you.
Yeah. Well, and I'm the youngest. I have two siblings. My brother is 5 years older. My sister is 8 years older. So you can imagine that there was a real sense of my folks wanting to get me over the finish line. I think parents always feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But,
yeah,
for me, it was like we get Keith out of college and it's almost like pre-retirement.
Right.
So there was pressure there too. And I think this about me, but we haven't mentioned it yet. The other sense in which I was kind of paying my dues is that I knew it was going to be tough to finance school. We were not a wealthy family,
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with this crazy idea to enlist in the Army, part-time.
Right.
Because I figured that would help me get an Army scholarship. So, at the time, I don't think I realized how much pressure I was putting on myself, but you can picture the scene now, because what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, all of my favorite topics are unavailable to me. I can't do that. I have to do whatever topic adults in my life tell me is going to lead to employment.
Right.
And I have to do whatever I have to pay for school, and if that means joining the Army, which that was really the reason. It was all about money, Now, it's not that the Army had no appeal. I also thought that it was going to give me the discipline that I had lacked as a high school student, and that was an important factor.
You did. And you thought about, and I think if I recall, you did that independently. Like this was something you decided on your own. Nobody put that in your head, right?
My folks not only thought I was crazy, they were against it. They didn't forbid it. Okay. So
Yep.
I was a kid.
You were 17. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my folks had to sign. You can't enlist younger than 18. So I really was a kid. So there was a lot of talk about paying for school.
Right.
It was all that was the whole thing.
Right.
But still you go to basic, you have to learn how to do these things. So I was I was certainly mentally prepared to go and serve if I had to. But we haven't talked about my college years, but I was supposed to graduate in 90. I had a semester off when I did a research project. It was kind of like an internship, but not a traditional one. I was actually doing this MBTI SAT research that I think I had mentioned to you at some point along the line.
Yeah.
And so I graduated a little bit later, and I graduated in 91. And that's very related to this whole Army business, because that means that between 85 and 91 or whatever, I was doing my weekends, I was training, I was rappelling and stuff, but it was just all this while I'm going to school. But then, and all of my friends, including my freshman roommate and so on, that did graduate on time in 1990, that spring was the first Gulf War.
Okay.
They all immediately, at 21 years old, they all immediately got commissioned, and like a week later, we're on a plane.
Yeah.
But that wasn't my experience because I was late. That wasn't the plan, because I had made that decision a couple of years later.
Mm-hmm.
But my colonel at the time said, "Keith, you're not going anywhere. I don't care if your reserve unit wants you or whatever. You belong to me, because you have just a few months before you graduate. We're paying for your school, right?" It was actually an issue because I also belonged to a reserve unit.
Oh, okay.
So there was this conflict between it was the who owns me. In fact, that program, which they called the simultaneous membership program, they don't do anymore because it created this issue that I was both an enlisted person and a future officer at the same time. I belonged to two organizations.
Okay.
I think they just hadn't anticipated that this could be a problem, that you could have a call up and one of those organizations needs me, but the other organization can't let me go. So that was, I think they figured that out. But at the time, it was a real problem. You had a lot of people reading contracts and going through things and trying to figure out which of these two organizations owns Keith.
Who owned Keith?
Yeah. You are Army property. I remember getting a sunburn, and any Army vet can tell you this. If you get a sunburn, your drill sergeants will say, you've damaged Army property. And they can actually write you up. They can actually fine you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I've learned a lot of new things already here. Yeah. So you talked about the research project that you did in the middle of school, which was not an engineering project, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So quick way to explain that is WPI, where I went, which is in Worcester, Mass. Worcester Polytechnic Institute, has 3 graduation requirements that make them a little bit unusual. So you have to do a project in your major. It's kind of like an undergraduate thesis, but it's kind of a big deal. You spend like a year on it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to do one in the social sciences. And the idea behind that was the social impact of technology. So if you're going to if you're going to learn how to build highways, then maybe it's a good idea to take some classes and learn about, like when the Cross Bronx Expressway destroyed a neighborhood. And, the whole idea is the societal impact of technology, which I thought was really amazing. It's one of the things that I loved about WPI. But then you also have to do one in the humanities. So I did a computer science project because that was my major.
Yeah.
And then the social science one that I did was on learning styles. It would, I tried to kind of somewhat tie it into my computer science. What I was trying to do is figure out how knowing someone's learning style could help you build more effective computer-based instruction.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds cooler than it was. It was very primitive. But yeah, I was just a kid, But I had to learn, I had to figure out learning styles.
Right.
And that's what led me to the MBTI. And then the humanities one was in philosophy, which has continued to be a lifelong, interest. Yeah, but the MBTI one was kind of a life-altering one, at least for a time.
So let's clarify. MBTI is the Myers-Briggs type
Indicator assessment.
Okay.
It's kind of funny because they put the trademark on the MBTI, and then they want to make sure that people understand that it's the publisher did that some years ago. But yeah, that's the. And
so can you tell our listeners? A lot of people have heard of the Myers-Briggs, but can you just tell our listeners in a nutshell what the MBTI is and how that fit into the project that you did?
It's based on Jung, and Jung had this theory. People, you'll hear Jung made it up or whatever, because he wasn't an experimentalist, but he saw patients. So he felt that you had two ways of perceiving and two ways of judging. You had two ways of taking information and two ways of judging. So he described those, and then famously he coined the phase introversion. So he also talked about introversion and extroversion. Right. And you take those two simple concepts together, and you basically get Jung's version of the MBTI. So at the end of my freshman year at WPI, you had to sign up for these projects. Mm-hmm. And there'd be sign-up sheets outside professors' doors. It was a big thing. And when you were freshmen, there was a particular ritual that everybody engaged in. And that was all of your advisors would say, you got to get this social science thing out of the way. To do the project in your major, it's too early because you're freshman. What do you know about your major? You've been too busy taking, freshman classes. Get this social science thing done. And I said, okay, I'm going to find a social science faculty member and talk to them about this project idea. And lo and behold, about a week or two after that, there was going to be this big conference on campus. And he said, not only am I willing to take you on as a project student, well, I'll take you on, but not only that, I want to invite you to this professional adult. He was great because he had students do things that usually only the faculty would do. He was constantly inviting us to do whatever he was doing, not drawing the separation between professors and students. So he said, hey, I'm the chair of this conference, like in a week. And why don't you just come and hang out? So I did. And it was on, he was a sociologist of science. Mm-hmm. And what that means basically is he tries to understand how scientists work together as teams to innovate and to be creative. So sounded interesting to me. It sounded like all the stuff that my high school teachers told me not to read about, which I had always liked, Right. So for me, it was a homecoming. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
So I go to this conference, and he introduces me to a woman named Mary McCauley, who is not famous, but I think she deserves to be a lot more famous than she is. But Mary McCauley met Isabel Myers, the daughter of the mother-daughter team, in 1968. Isabel was trying to really bring the MBTI to a new level. It wasn't well known yet.
Yeah.
And Mary McCauley was a professor of psychology at the University of Florida, met Isabel, was very impressed. And for the next 20 years, they were inseparable. They worked together almost every day over that 20-year period. And Mary is probably more responsible than anyone else for making the MBTI famous, because that's really what they did together. They founded a nonprofit that was a research house, and they put this out. So I meet Mary at this event. I'm just a kid. I'm a freshman. And I said, so nice to meet you, Mary. Your professor says that you're doing this project. I said, yeah, but it's on learning styles. It's learning styles. It has nothing to do with personality. So it was very nice meeting you, but I think about this person who's going to change my young life, right? But I said, I was dismissive about it. I said, I found this thing called the Learning Style Inventory.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
And she goes, Keith, sit down. We are going to have lunch. And that changed the next 10 years of my life, that lunch.
I love that.
Yeah. Not just my undergraduate career. In fact, really, in a sense, it kind of led to my first real job. in many ways. But again, at that young age, so I started this research project that continued until really more than 10 years. I mean, at least the first 15 years of my career was very much, in fact, the fact that I do data science now comes directly from this event. Because
right from that lunch.
Yeah, truly, because until that lunch, I had no particular interest in statistics. I had taken one statistics course that I was forced to take. I didn't like the course, didn't particularly like the professor, didn't like the textbook. There was really nothing about that course that I liked. I didn't retain it very well. But now I had a reason that I had to understand statistics, because I had to understand psychometrics. I had to understand test design. I didn't even know what that word was, until after meeting Mary.
Right.
But when you think about it, to look at the SAT and the MBTI together, you have to understand the psychometrics of each. So, behind us, I can kind of see in the webcam here, I've got about 12, and just in this bookcase alone, I've got about 12 or 15 linear feet of psychometrics books. And it comes from that lunch. I'd never even known that psychometrics was a thing before that lunch.
So I'm curious, what happened or what was spoken in that lunch that you would say was a pivotal moment, or was said? What was triggered within you? Or was there something specific that Mary shared with you that, how did Mary have you at hello?
Well, really two things. No, but you frame it in exactly the right way, because it really was that pivotal. But it was really two things. Keith, trust me on this. The MBTI is helpful on learning styles, which I just had to take on faith. And you can imagine, I wasn't really a pay attention to authority kid, right?
Right. We know that.
She was charming. Right. And I felt that she was someone that I could trust. So I've always been one to be quite willing to take what someone says on faith until I learn otherwise. But then the other thing that she was doing is she was offering mentoring in this area. And I've always felt that's the best way to learn. But somehow I felt that this was someone that I could trust, that was going to mentor me. And I was about to embark on this intellectual journey. So why would I want to refuse a mentor?
Yeah. I mean, it's so remarkable. Here you are, you're basically a kid, and you're a new college student still. You meet this older woman at a conference, you have lunch with her, and something really landed for you in that moment. I mean, you didn't know at that moment that it was going to, create this relationship that was going to go on for all those years. Yeah. But still, the fact that you the fact that you were that open to her, and the fact that she took the time to sort of say, Keith, trust me on this, that she saw something in you too. And you can't put data on that. There was just a connection there. Yeah. that just needed to happen. I think we all have, or I hope we all have, stories that we can point to, kind of what I call those defining moments where something just happens that we can't explain entirely. And yet, there is a story around it, but we can't necessarily explain all the elements of it. So I'm going to fast forward us a little bit. So you finished up your computer science degree, but you also continued on this research, and then you graduated and continued to work directly with Mary at that point. Is that true or no?
Yeah. So just to wrap up on the Army piece, because obviously that was somewhat hanging over me, right? So first Gulf War starts in 1990. When I graduated in 1991, it was the beginning of the drawdown, which most people wouldn't remember. But that was a big deal for me, because I had always assumed that I would have to go active duty after graduating, because I was on the hook for that. That's what I owed. That's what I owed the Army for paying for my thing. And I had planned for it. I wasn't even particularly trying to avoid it. And they had put everybody the previous year active duty, which they never do.
Yeah.
So my year, they put no one on active duty. So suddenly it was like, okay, now what? Because for years, I had assumed that I would be active duty for at least 4 years. And then I suddenly wasn't. So what I decided to do was to start my own business.
Oh.
You can imagine my folks were thrilled. And I started an SAT prep business.
Ah, okay.
Because the Army didn't like me working in college, but I had to pay for everyday bills like utilities and stuff. My scholarship didn't pay the light bill,
Right.
Didn't pay for pizza on the weekend, if I got hungry and the cafeteria was closed.
Right.
Just very simple things like that. In fact, a funny detail, what Army scholarship recipients got for a stipend? So we were barred from working $100 a month. So we were supposed to pay all of our everyday expenses with $100 a month. I'm not making that up. True story.
Wow. Because
it took an act of Congress to increase that, and it just hadn't been important enough for anybody to do. So that had been the same number since the 60s. It's just ridiculous.
Wow.
Okay. So the reason this isn't so important is because I got by tutoring, and most of my tutoring was SAT prep.
Oh, okay.
Because of the whole thing that started in high school where I knew that this was something I was good at.
Right.
And I always knew that I kind of liked mentoring and coaching people myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked seeking out mentors, but I also liked being the mentor. Even in the Army, I always wanted to be the one to volunteer to do the demonstration or the class. So this seemed like a natural fit. Problem is, starting a business is tough, So, but I did that quite successfully. And of course, I knew quite a bit about it. Wasn't making a fortune, but I was getting by. I was proud of the work that I did, but I needed a little bit of extra income, certainly, because I was the founder of a brand new business.
Yeah.
So I was still going to these conferences to present the undergraduate research that had never stopped.
Oh.
I was going all over the place. I was like, Center for Applications to Psychological Type, which is the nonprofit that Mary and Isabel founded, did these conferences, and they were really cool. You would have the MBTI in Culture conference in Hawaii. Who doesn't want to go to that?
Right.
MBTI and Education conference in Atlanta or what have you.
Right.
So I was going to all of these.
Yeah.
But I was a young entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I was busy. I didn't have money. It was a really kind of a tough situation. So Jerry McDade was the CEO of the Center of Applications of Psychological Type at the time. So he kind of ran the day-to-day, and Mary was kind of founder and president.
Right.
And he saw me speak and said, Keith, I'm excited to see next year's. This was fantastic, what you just presented. And think about it, I was getting some speaking experience too, which is so helpful now.
Yeah.
In my career, because I was speaking, I was 22, 23, 24 years old, talking to audiences of 50 or 60. At the time, it didn't seem surprising, but I realize now that was so helpful.
Yeah.
In my career now, just kind of knowing how to work a room when body language tells you that people aren't paying attention or whatever. I started to learn those things at a fairly early age.
Yeah.
I even did some keynotes when I was early 20s.
Wow.
So because I had all this research stuff that I was reporting. So Jerry said, would love to have you come back next year. And I said, Jerry, I don't have money to come back next year.
Yeah.
And that's when CAPT hired me to be their in-house statistics guy.
I see. Okay.
Working remotely from this house, actually.
Wow.
And I did that concurrent with the tutoring business for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But, the details get a little bit more complicated than that.
Right.
But that's how I got through that stage in my career. But it immersed me in the statistics, because now I wasn't just doing the statistics for me. I was analyzing other people's data sets. It was almost like I was a statistics consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And that led quite directly to SPSS.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
SPSS.
Yeah, statistical package for the social sciences.
Right. I've heard of it. I just wanted you to spell it out for us.
Yeah, it's now an IBM product, but it's been around for decades. In fact, it's almost exactly my age. It came out in the late 60s.
Wow. So, so you had all these experiences from a fairly young age, and yet it sounded like you were really kind of following your gut at this point. You had fewer people sort of steering the ship. You were steering the ship at this point, and kind of creating a flow or some flexibility around your commitment to the Army, and really trying to manage and maintain your financial stability at the same time. Uh,
That's fair to say. So
were you enjoying your life at that point?
no, I think it's fair to say that I was struggling. I mean, starting a business is a really stressful thing. There was a period probably where I was passionate about these things. I think you're right that I'd taken the reins at that stage,
Yeah.
but I think I was surrounded by skeptics.
Yeah.
Mary was not a skeptic. Jerry was not a skeptic, but probably almost everybody else in my life was a skeptic. And the other piece of the puzzle, which I haven't mentioned yet, but we don't have to talk about in length, is that I really thought that I would end up pursuing a PhD at that point, because psychometrics, that's the kind of thing where you get a PhD.
Yeah,
So I was either going to do a PhD in psychometrics or a master's in school psych.
Right.
Because I felt like I just felt like I was the kind of person who did grad school. That's really all it was at the time.
Right.
But okay, here it is. I've got a business. The business is doing okay, but it's not like I'm a wealthy guy. Now I'm thinking about grad school. Probably everybody in my life probably just wondered, the kid has to make a decision here. Was probably what was going on.
Yeah. So for how long did you go on with kind of the balance of the contract with
CAPT?
Yeah.
Yep. That lasted a while, like 3 or 4 years, and I found that very rewarding. And Mary was a huge fan of me doing graduate work. She was really, really excited for me to do that and was very, very supportive. But the next thing that happened was more coincidence than anything else, but that changed my life all over again. So if I said that Mary's influence was really powerful for about that 10-year period, this is the moment of transition. So I go to my boss in this small, it's just part of my life, this part-time work that I'm doing for CAPT. And I said, look, I'll do a little bit of a trade with you. If you pay for a bunch of SPSS training, because I'm using that statistics software every day, if you pay the training fee, I'll take the classes in my spare time. So I won't be on the clock, when I do those classes. And if it means that I have to travel to another city, I'll pick up the travel myself. I'll go up to Washington, D.C., where SPSS had a big office during the summer when I know a bunch of kids there's a bunch of empty rooms all over.
Right.
So, kids that are home from Georgetown over the summer, whatever, I knew I could figure that out. I ended up going up there for like 10 or 12 weeks, but I took every class they offered for this training fee that CAPT had paid for. And that was a huge milestone because we're talking a serious amount of material now. So we're talking 30, 40 business days of really heavy duty, 8-hour-a-day statistics software training.
Wow.
So naturally they got to know me. I would show up and they'd say, Keith is back for class again today. Because some people might only go to like 3 days, but I had basically taken almost like a little sabbatical to do all this training. But I learned some serious stats theory during that experience to supplement what I had learned along the way. Because remember, I'd been doing research for 10 years at that point. So I wasn't a rookie, but this kicked me up to the next level.
Yeah.
They got to know me, and during break, they said, we've been desperate to find someone to teach the basic class. But every time we interview a professor, they're too academic. And every time we interview a business consultant, they're not academic enough. We can't find anybody that strikes the right balance, but we think that you would. And I said, I'm kind of younger than the other trainers. I don't have a PhD. And the guy said, I just think you need to talk to my boss, because he said, frankly, I don't care about that stuff, about the credentials, because I've done like 20 interviews now and I haven't found anybody that would be as good as you at this. You need to call Chicago. You need to call headquarters and talk to my boss. And they gave me a shot, and I loved it. And the students in my classes thought it was fantastic, to the point where they would, when is Keith's next class, kind of a thing, I mean, I was a hit, even kind of from the very early years. So that was my primary income for 20 years.
Wow.
After that.
Wow.
That was the beginning of my career. Well, it tapered down. For 10 years, it was really important.
Right. And you were still working with CAPT too, right?
No, not at that point. Yeah. So
okay.
there was a small period of overlap, but the SPSS got really intense. So grad school had to go and CAPT had to go.
I see. And then now I know that you've also written several books. So tell us about those.
So, so I happen to just remember when the first book came out. So in 2013, I was past that 10-year mark teaching. I knew a lot of experts in the field. To be honest, I was not confident about reaching out to a publisher. So what I did is I did the multi-authored thing. I reached out to some of my other expert colleagues and said, why don't we have 5 of us get together? We're all known for one thing or another in this community. Let's collaborate, write this book. It will be all the people that are famous for this particular piece of software. And it did really well. And it wasn't for a big publisher. It was one of those kind of semi-self-authoring, kind of.
Yeah.
But it did really well because it was the first of its kind. And pretty much everybody in the community knew one or more of the 5 of us. That was the transition from people taking the class with me because they knew me. Not taking the class with me because I had been assigned to that class. That was a big milestone.
Wow. And so that was a big transition point. And then from there, that springboarded into more books, correct?
Yes. So I did a number of books, but it was more that, again, I was starting to develop, I guess, what we would call these days a personal brand. But now I spend very little time doing software training. It's maybe 5% of my year. It used to be 95% of my year. So now it's working with analytics leaders.
Okay.
So that's been a real shift. A few years ago, I was a VP of analytics and the general manager of a small team. I mean, quite small, like a half dozen people for a small consultancy. But we were the analytics folks, on that team. So that was another transition where I started to think, wow, there's so many people teaching the basics out there. I mean, you just, sometimes the light bulb goes off and you go, wow, this software business is well covered. I don't need to do that anymore.
Right.
There's lots of people that can do that in my absence.
Right.
What's completely missing is experienced analytics project leadership.
Right.
Because when I was in that VP of analytics role, I got a number of things right, I think, certainly made a lot of mistakes as well. But where do you go for mentorship when you're in that kind of a role? Almost nobody. There's almost no books on it. 1 or 2 of them have appeared since, just in the last year. It is just the beginning of getting to the point where there's enough people like me and some of my experienced colleagues that we can start to tell a director of analytics or somebody like that what we've learned over these many years now. So I've shifted almost completely away from practitioners to analytics leadership.
So it's really about working with, advising, and giving people insights into that kind of thinking.
Absolutely.
Right. And so if you were to, as we're wrapping up here, if you were to give somebody a piece of advice from your own experience about making transitions or making decisions as they're going forward in their careers, what would you say is a key piece of advice?
Well, on the analytics side, something that I frequently bring up when I'm asked those questions is something that I think that is just as useful to both the data scientist and their boss. And I think it also ties into all this talk about personality and learning styles that we've said.
Yeah.
That a number of data scientists will want to go into analytics leadership.
Right.
So what I say to both the C-suite and data scientists is kind of figure that out. Figure out if you want to be an individual contributor,
Yeah.
or if you want to be an analytics leader. And there's no shame in wanting to be an individual contributor. So what I say to the C-suite is offer up that path to all your technical folks. You have to give them a way that they don't feel that the only path to promotion is taking a job that they don't want.
Oh, I love that. That's great advice, because I think a lot of people do get caught in that trap and think that there's a have to rather than a want to.
Yeah.
In that way. Well, this has been really interesting, and I appreciate your time here today. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much. This was great fun.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Keith McCormick. It was so interesting to speak with him about his professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at www.tammygulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 118. Are you thinking about what your next professional move might be? Maybe you're feeling a little stuck. Get specialized group and individualized support, insights, and accountability from a brilliant mix of professional women in a safe, non-judgmental, creative space. Join one of my small hybrid mastermind coaching groups, starting on a rolling basis. You can learn more at https://bit.ly/navigating career change. If you were inspired by this episode with Keith, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I would really appreciate your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at www.tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. I would love to hear how it's going for you. Feel free to drop me a line. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.